You're listening to Nutrition Matters podcast with Paige Smathers, registered dietitian nutritionist. Nutrition Matters podcast explores how to approach food and your body in a whole new way. I interview people who share stories and expertise in rejecting diet culture, making peace with food, and discovering a more positive, realistic, and sustainable approach to health and well-being. I'm Paige Smathers, registered dietitian nutritionist, and owner of Positive Nutrition, an in-person nutrition therapy practice in Salt Lake City, Utah. I offer free resources, including this podcast, a blog, and posts on social media. If you're local to Salt Lake City, check out our services and availability for appointments, and keep your eyes out for in-person groups on mindfulness, intuitive eating, body image resilience, and more. Go to positive-nutrition.com and hit subscribe if you'd like to keep in touch. I also offer online courses covering topics like the science of nutrition, mindfulness, and healing your relationship with food. Check those out at positive-nutrition.com/academy. If you like what you hear on the podcast, you can make a difference by leaving a review, sharing with friends and family, or making a donation. Thank you so much for your support. You can also find me on Instagram or Facebook if you'd like to have a little more food for thought at Paige Smathers RD. Thank you so much for listening. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Nutrition Matters podcast. My name is Paige, and I'm your host, and I'm thrilled to bring you a conversation about a topic that I think is really, really important that sometimes we don't end up talking a lot about in the non-diet space. So I'm really excited to bring you a conversation where our intention is to really demystify this concept of gentle nutrition. And during the podcast, you'll hear me sort of give a good explanation of what gentle nutrition is, how it fits into intuitive eating. So if those terms don't make sense to you right away, that's okay. We'll go in and we'll explain it. But what we're doing is we're talking about the 10th principle, 10 out of 10, principle of intuitive eating, where we're talking about how to integrate principles of science and gentle nutrition into our approach with food. And to me, this is a really, really important concept. Many of you will likely already know that I just think that sometimes for some people, learning about the actual science of nutrition is not only interesting, but it can actually be really helpful in rejecting the dieting mentality, because sometimes we get so wrapped up in, looking at body image stuff and looking at challenging the diet mentality and looking at making peace with food. And those are all really, really important things to do. I do not mean to discount them. But sometimes for certain personalities, for certain brains, it can be really helpful to just challenge some of the logic of what diets even hold. And how true is it that diets say X, Y, or Z thing? And sometimes understanding the science of nutrition can actually be really helpful in the whole entire process of just kind of seeing through the lies of diet culture. So that's why I wanted to have this conversation. And if this podcast episode piques your interest, be sure to check out an online course that I co-taught with Jesse Hoffman, PhD, where we teach about the science of nutrition without the typical gimmicky stuff that often comes with it. So we talk about gut health. We talk about macronutrients. We teach you about how to detect a fad diet. We teach you about research and media literacy around these concepts. We talk about gut health, meal planning, grocery shopping, all kinds of things. So just wanted to throw that out there, that if this piques your interest, if you feel like it's a good fit for you to kind of explore this a bit more, do check out Positive Nutrition 101. If you're someone who is like, okay, I'm going to listen to this podcast, but I'm not sure I'm ready for like the gentle nutrition side of things, just also know that there are lots of resources available to you as well. My other course called Positive Nutrition for Life, this is a really good course for anyone who's looking for ideas and skills and tools and actual, practical down-to-earth things that you can do and you can work on to start to create a healing, positive relationship with food. So that course is less sciencey, more associated with kind of helping you learn intuitive eating, helping you learn body image resilience, helping you learn some mindfulness principles, and then also some positive nutrition principles as well. So check those out. You can find those at positive-nutrition.com/academy. Okay, so with that, one other thing I wanted to mention is I do talk a little bit about groups that I run during this podcast episode. And just for your information, if you're local to Salt Lake City, I do try to run a few groups every year around intuitive eating. I did just start a new round of groups this week. So I will not be running another round of groups until early 2020. If you would like to get on my waiting list for that, you are more than welcome to reach out to the email address on the website, which is just hello@positive-nutrition.com, or you can also fill out the interest form at positive-nutrition.com/groups. Okay, so with that, I am so thrilled to share this conversation that I had with Rachael Hartley, who is a phenomenal dietitian. She's just so compassionate. She's so thoughtful. She is just someone that I just enjoy being around so much. And I think she has a really great perspective on this topic of gentle nutrition. So I hope you enjoy. Hi, Rachael. Welcome to Nutrition Matters podcast. And thanks so much for being here with me today.
Hi, Paige. Thank you so much for having me.
This is so fun. We're about to talk about a topic that I know you love, and I know that I love too. So I think we're going to be a good team here. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I'm really just thrilled to chat.
Yay. Okay. So Rachael, take a minute and just kind of talk about who you are and what you do sort of on a kind of basic level, and then we'll dive into the topic at hand, and then you can also share more about yourself as we go, for sure.
Absolutely. So I am a private practice dietitian and intuitive eating counselor in Columbia, South Carolina. And I work with clients like in town, and I also work with clients virtually. So my client base is about, half my clients are local and about half I work with virtually. And I just sort of see, I feel like a wide range of health concerns, that I focus on with an intuitive eating non-diet lens. So disordered eating, eating disorders, IBS, PCOS, really just, again, like the range of things that you see in the world of nutrition, but really focusing on it without, with that non-diet focus. And I also sort of have this little fun part of my business, which is I have a blog at The Joy of Eating where I share recipes and like free intuitive eating resources, kind of this, creative project that I started many years ago that somehow has grown into part of my business.
And did you have the blog before you kind of transitioned into more of the non-diet space? I kind of feel like I know some of the story, but not really. So share what that was like. How did you find this sort of intuitive eating non-diet space?
Right. So I did. I started my blog. I was at this very stuck point where I think I was starting to learn a little bit more about intuitive eating and mindful eating and non-diet nutrition. And I didn't really have the words or the language for it, but I was really starting to delve more into that space. And so actually when I started my blog, it definitely, there's some things that I look back and I'm like, oh, that does not a lot of kind of hidden old blog posts.
Well, and same with me with my podcasts. So, I mean, I think we all need a little space to learn and grow and figure this stuff out,
Absolutely. And I think there's something, I don't know if you experience this too, but I think there's something to, putting your work out there, whether it's, verbally over a podcast or written work, that really makes you think about your language and think about what you're saying and really start to formulate it just really helps you get a clearer, a clearer vision or just solidify your values when it comes to practicing in this field. So I as much as I look back and feel a little bit cringy sometimes, I also feel very grateful that I have an outlet to just put stuff out there and get critical about myself and my own and my own writing and my own beliefs. And it really helped me formulate my, my approach and move to that non-diet realm. So,
yeah. And sometimes you need to kind of put it out there to really figure out, does that resonate? Does that not? How does that feel a month later or a year later? And I think I kind of believe, I don't know if my podcast listeners will be aware of this, but my perspective is I'm not ashamed of that growth. And I'm not, like
Yeah.
you said, like, yes, I do have that cringy reaction sometimes, like, oh, I wouldn't say it like that now, or, ooh, that was really insensitive. But it's also like,
Yeah.
it's okay. I'm allowed to be not perfect. And I'm still allowed to be not perfect even now,
Right.
you know?
Right, right. Yeah, like I hope in a few years, like I can look back at even like maybe even look back at this podcast and be like, "Oh, I wish I said that a little bit differently."
Yeah.
Like if I'm not, then I'm not growing and that's not very cool.
Yeah. Good point. Oh, I love it. So
Yeah.
how did you find this intuitive eating space? Like, did so you were formally trained by Evelyn Tripoli, is that right? You have the certification?
Yes, yep. So yeah, I think when I look back on my career, so I was actually, when I went to college, I was a double major with psychology and nutrition. And so I think part of that, like, psychology training and education, like, I think that that sort of primed me in a way, even going through and that's not to say that I was at all practicing in a non-diet way when I started as a dietitian, but I always had this sense of like we're not just talking about nutrition and food in this like laboratory setting. Like we're talking about actual human beings with actual relationships to food. And so I think I always sort of had that in the background of my practice. But certainly, I think like many people, I had this just sort of messy transition where, first I started learning more about mindful eating. And as I was learning more about mindful eating, I, started discovered intuitive eating and started delving into that. And as I was working on intuitive eating, learning more about health at every size. And so it's definitely, it was a messy transition, but even when I look back at the beginnings of my career, I kind of see the little things that primed me to be ready for that information. Yeah, I think a lot of it's just like having the language to be able to
Mm-hmm.
communicate these things. Yeah.
And it kind of is like a foreign language, right? Because the language that we're steeped in around food is so oriented toward manipulation and distrust and looking outside of yourself for authorities as far as what's good, quote unquote, or what's bad, or what we should be doing or what we shouldn't be doing. And so even in school to become a dietitian, I think for me at least, it really helped me to kind of chill out about food and to realize like, oh, once I learn about the science, I realize I don't really need to overthink this. It's actually fairly simple as far as like the practical side of eating. But
Yeah.
anyway, I don't know where I'm going with that.
No, no, I think that's such yeah, because I mean, as dietitians, we've obviously all had a ton of like really scientific training. And I think there's this, I don't know, this is my kind of theory of things. Because as dietitians, sometimes within the healthcare realm, we tend to be like our position isn't really as valued. And I at least know that this was my experience. Sometimes I felt like I needed to prove myself with nutrition and make nutrition a lot more complicated than it needed to be, just to kind of like show up like, look how much I know. Like we are the nutrition experts. And there is like all this really cool, fascinating, in-depth science with nutrition. But when we look at it from a practical level of like, what do you need to know to just feed your body? It is really, really simple. And I don't think that detracts from, the role of dietitians and what we do. But yeah, I don't know if that kind of connects or makes sense there.
No, it does. And that really is a great segue into what we're planning on chatting about today, this idea of gentle nutrition. So let's set the stage really quick, Rachel. I'll do my best, and then I want you to kind of add your thoughts as well. So many of my listeners will be aware that I really like to discuss pick a topic for a podcast episode, pick a friend, a colleague who I think will do a great job of exploring this with me. And I'm also very sensitive to the fact that many people find my podcast because it has the word nutrition in it. And so they might search on their podcast app and say, oh, okay, I'll listen to this one with the strawberries on it. Sweet. And I'm sensitive to the fact that, the way that Rachel and I and my guests approach nutrition is often very countercultural, very different, very unique. Kind of like you were saying, Rachel, we have different language. There's a lot of different wording and phrasing that we use as compared to maybe the typical way people talk about food and nutrition. So we have this topic today of talking about gentle nutrition. And what we mean by that is when Rachel and I work with our clients as registered dietitians, we approach their nutrition, their well-being, their self-care around food from a non-diet lens. And one really popular non-diet approach is called intuitive eating. And the intuitive eating approach is, just so people know, there's a book. It's written by Evelyn Tribole and Elise Resch. And there's 10 principles in intuitive eating. And the very last principle of intuitive eating is gentle nutrition. So after you have worked really hard to reject the diet mentality, make peace with food, discover satisfaction, work on hunger and fullness, and all these other different elements that intuitive eating talks about, the very end of the book says, okay, now that we've worked on rejecting all of the diet mentality that seeps up, how can we kind of weave in some scientific knowledge or some understanding of the science of nutrition into our approach with food? And that sounds relatively straightforward, I'm sure, to many of you. But this is actually like somewhat of a, I don't know if controversial is the right word, but like it's kind of hard for someone like Rachel or I to talk about this, because we know that there are folks with very significant eating disorders, very significant struggles with food listening. And when we talk about nutrition, even if our intention is really good and solid and pure, someone who's in the midst of a deep struggle with this might interpret some of the things we talk about as rigid or rules-based or trying to manipulate your body. So we're going to do our best to kind of tread some tricky waters as we talk about a principle that hopefully most people will approach after they've done a lot of other work to really challenge that diet mentality. What else would you add to that, though, Rachel?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that introduction to gentle nutrition, because it really, we tend to view, not, and when I say we, I mean like collective, like big, population wise, we tends to view nutrition as like the end all be all of health, when in reality, it's like one aspect of it and not even necessarily the most important aspect. And so for someone who's really struggling with their relationship with food and, struggling with an eating disorder, putting nutrition on the back burner can actually be like the healthiest thing for you. So it's not, it is okay to deprioritize nutrition, in certain seasons of life.
Yeah. And that seems radical for many because, like you said so well, in our collective culture, we really do think of, when we think of, quote, getting healthy, the first two things that come to mind are, okay, what are we eating and how are we moving our body, right?
Right. Food and fitness. And, health is so much more like multidimensional than that. And it's not even like, health is like a thing that you get your certificate of like being a healthy person. Like our, health is going to change over the course of our life. So it's, when we think about, I kind of think about health as essentially like our quality of life, and certainly nutrition is something that that can contribute to it, but it is not. There are so many aspects to it, many of which are just like our control. And so I like to, again, as much as being a dietitian, obviously I value nutrition and the role that it plays in life, but I also want to keep it in perspective and not put nutrition up on a pedestal.
Yeah. And that's actually something that I often say when I run groups, intuitive eating groups. I really like to, so the format of my groups is we do like a principle from the intuitive eating book per week. And what can happen, especially toward the end when we're talking about gentle nutrition, is people are like, okay, they're like rubbing their hands together, like, okay, now we're on to the good stuff. Now we're into the most important things. Like, sure, we've done all these other things. And it's really important to emphasize that each of the principles of intuitive eating, in my opinion, run best and work best for us and promote our health the very best when they are kind of on a level playing field with each other. So
Yeah.
when even though honoring hunger and respecting our fullness are also two principles of intuitive eating, we really want to be careful not to say, okay, yeah, those are the two most important ones. And then, yeah, the whole satisfaction thing, whatever, that's just lower. Right?
Right,
So they're
right.
all important.
Yes, yeah. And there's different, like, depending on what, different times in our life, like certain principles might be more or less emphasized. And also, too, just like based on, our sort of individual, like, access and privileges, like there may be certain principles that might, that we might have barriers to being
Yeah.
able to incorporate. And I don't think that that necessarily means you're like doing intuitive eating wrong or that you're failing at intuitive eating. Like they're just each of us have our own barriers, and intuitive eating is it's principles, they're guidelines, they are not rules that you have to like follow to a T.
Oh, I love that. And I totally agree. I often say this, that I think that if we turn, well, let me say it this way. I think one of the big pitfalls of intuitive eating is thinking that the goal is to become an intuitive eater, quote unquote. And when we
Hmm.
do that, I think we have to, in order to even understand what we mean by becoming an intuitive eater, we have to conceptualize and oversimplify and kind of label and put, a box
Hmm.
around this term. And I think the very nature of doing that makes it so that we're actually not really doing intuitive eating. Does that make sense? So
Absolutely.
rather than thinking that the goal is to become an intuitive eater, my opinion is that the goal is really just to figure out how to eat and how to care for yourself with food that enables you to live the life you really want to live. And like you said, depending on your history, your background, your financial situation, your whatever it might be, certain principles of intuitive eating may be more or less accessible to you, and that's okay. This is not a checklist of like being the perfect intuitive eater.
Right, right, right. Yeah, like I kind of tell my clients that, intuitive eating, it provides us this like, these tools, like this, basically like this toolbox full of principles that, that we can pull out and use and have access to. But you don't have to be using like every single one at every single moment in order to be this like, air quote, perfect intuitive
Yeah.
eater. Like it is building in more tools that help you learn how to feed yourself in a way that cares for your physical and mental health. And there's other tools outside of intuitive eating too. Like it's not like there's other tools that we can incorporate. So
Yep.
yeah.
Great point. I love that. I'm curious what your thoughts are. There's quite a bit of rhetoric around so I've already kind of alluded to this about around the idea that like gentle nutrition is not something you should ever talk about until you have done all the other all 9 principles before it, and be careful with gentle nutrition. There's some sort of, I don't know, fear, or sort of not fear,
Right.
I guess a little bit of just trying to be careful about talking about this topic, especially in formats like Instagram or a podcast or social media in general, because the audience is diverse and broad, and we're trying to sort of consider the most vulnerable who might be there. What's your opinion about sort of the idea that this needs to come absolutely last, and don't even look at this until you've done X, Y, and Z? What do you think about that?
Right. Yeah. So I think it makes a lot of sense that, from, writing like the book, like I think there is definitely value to the reason that gentle nutrition comes last, or the emphasis on it. But I also find that when we like, and actually, as I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking back to like a client that I worked with earlier this morning, who I've been working with for quite some time, and we've done a lot of work with intuitive eating. And she had questions about gentle nutrition, and you know, I, I I think there is, like, when we hold off on it too, like when we don't explain what gentle nutrition is, I think that can kind of contribute to this idea of like putting it up on a pedestal. Like, like now that I've mastered these other principles of intuitive eating, now I can approach gentle nutrition and eat, quinoa and kale with every single meal. And in reality, when we help people understand a little bit earlier that gentle nutrition is probably things that you're already doing, like
And that
you're
you already
probably
know.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, and things that you're that you already know, that you've already heard, that aren't like super sexy or anything. It really yeah, it makes it seem like gentle nutrition is this like big secret out there, and it's
Yeah.
really not. Yeah, it's really like basic stuff.
I agree. I see why people say that and I see where they're coming from. And this isn't a criticism of that. But at the same
Right.
time, I do agree with you. I think that if we act as if this is like, whoa, be careful. Here we go. We're about to talk about nutrition. Watch out. We have we run the risk of it sounding like, yeah, like we have some secret. We're going to pull the wool over your eyes. This is going to be totally different from anything else you've
Yeah.
done on your intuitive eating journey. And then my other big complaint about that is I just think it's a false statement or assumption when we think that we can, quote, master the rest of the principles. Like,
Yes.
I'm constantly uncovering more ways diet mentality seeps into my clients' lives, new ways it seeps into my friends and family, my own life, my own experience. And I think it's just sort of like, it's just kind of silly to think, okay, I'm done with that. Now I move on to this. It's like, I think we're always
Right.
doing this process.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because we all have, our bodies and our health status, like it is going to change throughout our life. And of course, like just our, like our life in general, like whether it's, having kids, changing jobs, like everything is always in flux. And so there's this idea that we have to like master these nine principles of intuitive eating before moving on to nutrition. It can feel like, quite prohibitive. And especially because sometimes there's times where nutrition might be introduced a little bit earlier on in a way. And of course, this is very individual to the this is where like talking about intuitive eating as a broad concept versus incorporating it with individual clients is different. But there's times where introducing it a little bit earlier on can be helpful for people in certain situations.
Absolutely. And I think when I kind of lost my train of thought earlier, I was talking about how when I learned about nutrition, it actually really helped me chill out about nutrition, about like the things that I was
Yeah.
so concerned about. And I know this isn't everyone's story, but for me, going through biochemistry and all my nutrition courses and all of that kind of helped me realize, I may be overthinking this, and maybe it's not so big of a deal to do X, Y, or Z with my eating, or to let go of this rule. And I found that and another thing I just want to say here that's why I made this course called Positive Nutrition 101, which is all about the science of nutrition without that gimmicky sort of, and this is how you manipulate your body with this knowledge. It's just like, hey, do you want
Right.
to learn about carbohydrate, fat, protein? And do you want to learn about meal planning and gut health and, all these interesting aspects of the science of nutrition that I think ultimately can kind of help us fortify against fad diets sort of seductive claims too, which I think is
Right.
empowering for some.
Absolutely. Yeah, because when we, part of, part of intuitive eating is like unlearning all this weight focused, diet focused nutrition that we've learned. Because gosh, like when is nutrition ever talked about? Like not in the context of trying to manipulate your body. And so being able to actually like replace that information with science on food and nutrition, it provides a basis that can inoculate you from some of this, some of the diet culture or diet mentality that you come up with in culture.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Yeah.
love that. Great word, inoculate. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, Rachel, when your clients ask you about gentle nutrition, obviously they probably don't word it that way. They probably, the way that they ask, I'm sure, is something like, okay, yeah, I've worked on rejecting the diet mentality. I've developed some skills to connect to my body a little bit better. And maybe they might say, gosh, I feel like a little all over the place with my eating, or am I allowed to have structure with food, or am I allowed, like, is it okay if I eat a, nutritious meal instead of, some other meal that I maybe don't want, but I worry, is it bad to choose the more nutritious option? Is that okay? Do you ever have clients kind of come to you in that place with food?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Where it's and thankfully a lot of my clients already have I think because a lot of the clients I work with online have a sort of basis in intuitive eating. They're
Yeah,
already sort of like familiar with
they've
like the
done their
broad
research.
sense
Research.
of it. Yeah, yep. So they kind of know like gentle nutrition and like that coming last. So surprisingly, I do have a lot of clients who kind of bring up that phrase, gentle nutrition. But yeah, oftentimes it is sort of like am I bad by wanting to get a salad or wanting to eat vegetables? It's all about, the intentions there. But yeah, it's really interesting. I kind of think about gentle nutrition, like I guess, I don't know, like my definition or my way of thinking about it is, what does it look like when we zoom out and get the bird's eye view of the patterns of eating over time, and not kind of focusing in on each individual meal and each individual snack, but the big picture of our eating. And when I do that with clients, when we're looking at nutrition, it's really cool to see how a lot of them are just already incorporating gentle nutrition as part of their life. So yeah,
Or almost like intuitively, right? Kind
yeah,
of
in an
once,
intuitive way.
yeah,
Hmm.
once they've sort of explored this, like you said, maybe the break from thinking about nutrition and just really just enjoying the foods that they have not let themselves eat with their dieting days, and just kind of have some time to just enjoy food. And I want, by the way, the whole process, we should enjoy food. I'm not saying then when you
Yes.
incorporate gentle nutrition, you all of a sudden don't enjoy food anymore. That's not what I mean. Words are hard, you guys.
Yep.
um,
But
but I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, a lot of times the pendulum sort of overcorrects a little bit, like you've spent so much time over here in restriction. It only makes sense that, like, the laws of physics will sort of dictate that you might spend a little bit of time in sort of what's been termed donut land, right? Where you're just like, woohoo,
right.
I'm having so much
Yep.
fun. I'm eating all the things. And, um, and a lot of times people do kind of say, okay, that was good to have both of those experiences. Now I'm kind of ready to find this middle ground that maybe I've never been there my entire life. Like, I don't know what this even looks like, right?
Right, right. Yeah, and I think that kind of gets back to what we were talking about before, and that when we think that gentle nutrition is this like special way of eating, that people will often miss that that they're already engaging with it. And now, of course, too, when we zoom out on nutrition, sometimes we find like different areas where it's like, oh yeah, I'm going out to lunch every single day at work. Are there ways that maybe I can, pack a lunch some days, or, perhaps like incorporate produce into my breakfast? Like there might be little things here and there where we, identify an area where we can make some changes that improve that overall nutrient density of what we're eating. But it's not like it's something that's going to be life changing, or the thing that's going to inoculate you with ooh, there's that word again, that's going to keep you healthy for the rest of your life. Like it's not going to be this magical thing, but it might be a way that we're able to work in yeah, just work in some more nutrient dense foods.
Yeah, I love that. So, Rachel, one thing that comes up for a lot of my clients with this is just the confusion around, you mentioned that the intention behind the vegetables or the salad or the whatever it might be is really what we're interested in here. But I think that that can be so tricky and so nuanced for folks that they can be like, well, wait a minute, I'm not sure if I have the right intentions. Or what if weight loss thoughts pop into my head? Or what if I have, body image thoughts that kind of play into my decisions around vegetables? Like, is that okay? How do I navigate that? Because it's not always like a clear-cut thing like, oh, now I'm just totally eating these foods for the right reasons. And that's a Bachelor joke for anyone who watches Bachelor.
I've missed this season, so I'm like, I don't get it.
Okay,
Really
no,
sad.
they're just obsessed with saying for the right reasons. That's all. It's not that funny.
Yeah, gotcha.
Okay.
But yeah, no, I hear you where it's like the intentions, with intuitive eating, I think it's the intentions more than the actual like behavior that makes the that's most important. And it can be, you're so right, like these things can be so woven together where it's really hard to untangle, what's a decision that's coming from self-care and taking care of myself, and what is a decision that's tied up in diet mentality. And it's really because the behavior might be the same, but it's very different intentions, and that's just really tricky to to figure out. I think at the end of the day, it's kind of looking at, do I feel a sense of should or have, like with this choice? Do I feel like, does it feel neutral for me to like not eat the vegetable versus eating the vegetable? Do I feel like there is this overwhelming sense of should involved with this versus like, I'd like to, or I could? I think that's really a helpful place to start in untangling entangling those decisions from diet mentality.
Yeah, I love that. And it's also just, it's okay for these decisions around food to be a little bit messy. I think it's to be expected, right? It's like, and I think when we get really rigid about, no, now that you've learned about intuitive eating, you need to have 100% pure intentions every single time you eat, and you can't ever have these thoughts. That's going to drive someone, off the deep end. That's just not fair to ask of people. So,
Right. And it's going into it with this idea of like there's a right intuitive eating decision and
yeah.
a wrong intuitive eating decision, which is very much that diet mentality seeping into intuitive eating. Like sometimes you can just like make a decision and just like make a decision.
Yeah, you don't need to feel the weight of the world on your shoulders
Right.
every single time you choose foods. And it doesn't need to mean you're engaging in disordered eating or not necessarily. I mean, obviously, I want you to be aware of that, and I want you to be mindful and present. And, like you said, the bird's eye view, what's going on kind of on average? What are your patterns looking like? But if you hold yourself up to the standard of every single time I eat, it needs to be completely void of any problematic thoughts, I just think that will lead to even more problematic thoughts.
Right. And that's not realistic in this culture. Like we are so steeped in messaging about our bodies and fear mongering stuff about health. Like we are just so steeped in that constantly. I don't know that that's really realistic to make that every single choice for the rest of your life is not going to be influenced by that stuff. Like it's not realistic.
Absolutely. So Rachel, what are some kind of simple behaviors that you think enable people to engage in gentle nutrition best?
Yeah. So I always say, the most important part of nutrition is just like adequacy. So, before we even get to what we normally think of with nutrition, we have to make sure that our body is being fed adequately throughout the day, that we're fueling ourselves. So like it does not matter how many, green smoothies or like how much kale you eat. If you are not feeding and fueling yourself with an adequate amount of energy, like it really, like that stuff doesn't really matter. So, so I actually like to really think about nutrition in terms of that first. I don't know. Have you seen Ellen Satter's like the hierarchy? I forget exactly what it's called, but
Yeah.
like the hierarchy of yeah.
Okay, I'll
So
write that down and I'll look it up for people to reference it.
awesome. Yeah. And so I actually have sort of like a little simplified version of that I think about in the back of my head when I'm considering nutrition, and sort of at the bottom of that. And I should like, I guess, sort of define like it's a play on Maslow's like hierarchy of needs, where it's this little pyramid, not the food guide pyramid, but just a pyramid. And I think of it with, 4 steps, where at the bottom of that pyramid, the base of that pyramid is adequacy. From there, I like to think about balance, like, and not balance in terms of like, I ate an apple and so now I can have a brownie, or like vice versa. But balance in terms of macronutrients, like getting an array of macronutrients of fat and protein and carbohydrates when we eat. So that's kind of like the next step that I like to think about. From there, I think about variety, like, are we just getting a wide variety of different foods? When we're getting a wide variety of foods, we're automatically getting a wide variety of nutrients that our body needs. And then from there, thinking more about like, instrumental nutrition. Maybe you have, I don't know, high cholesterol, or maybe you have some other sort of health concern. And that's where we can look at nutrition in a little bit more of an instrumental way that can help with those concerns. But I think we really like, and that's like the area of nutrition that we tend to focus, that you often see focused on first, this kind of like, eat this for that. But really, we have to kind of bring it back to basics first.
Are you getting
like,
enough?
Okay, yeah, are you getting enough? And
Yeah.
Surprisingly, a lot, most of the clients that I work with when they first come in, they really are not eating enough, or they're going long stretches of time,
Yes, true
out
for me
eating, and
too.
eating is, yeah, very kind of chaotic. And even clients, like, if you're in a larger body, like, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not feeding your body adequately. So I think we always have to start with adequacy when it comes to nutrition.
Such a good point. Yes, you're so right. I think we do tend to focus on these kind of nitty gritty, higher on the hierarchy of needs type of
Mm-hmm.
details about nutrition. But really, like if the foundation of adequacy isn't there, who cares about, this or that tiny little nutrient? That's
Right. And
such
I
a good
mean,
point.
frankly, like that's pretty much the only type of nutrition that human beings, for like whatever, like tens of thousands of years or whatever of our existence, like that's the only type of nutrition we really have had the space to think about. So,
Yeah.
if that feels like that is not enough, we're still here, and that's been the level that human beings have been at most of time. So.
Ah, I love it. Yes, great point. So, can you just kind of reiterate what you just said? Just, I feel like people are going to want to see this visually, and podcasts are interesting because they're probably
Right.
in their car thinking. So, step one,
Yeah.
foundation of the pyramid is adequacy. Then what comes next?
Yes. So adequacy, I love that you say that, because as I was saying, like as I was explaining it, I was making a little triangle with my
Me
fingers,
too.
as if anyone can see that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so adequacy at the base of the pyramid. Then comes balance, which is more just, again, macronutrients. So getting fat, protein, carbohydrates when we eat. From there is variety. So getting like, different colors of fruits and vegetables, getting, whole grains, and then like, as well as like, regular white pasta and bread, getting, different kinds of fruits in there. And then from there is instrumental nutrition, which is more like kind of the individualized, sort of individualized nutrition of based on your kind of specific needs
Sure.
and your specific goals, I guess.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, okay, Rachel, I want to ask you, kind of circling back to that question I asked about folks struggling to really kind of grapple with their intentions around starting to look at the gentle nutrition side of intuitive eating, and kind of wondering, many folks have spent so much time in the diet mentality where they're just it's so foreign to look at something like broccoli or a whole grain bread or something like that and see it as like a neutral food where like it's been representative. Maybe not the bread thing. Maybe that's a bad example because bread is the current,
Right.
terrible thing. So words are hard. So anyway, but you see what I'm saying? Like, how can someone, I guess I would love to provide a couple ideas for how we can sort of start to look at gentle nutrition from the perspective of having some intentions that are grounded in self-care. So I recognize that I'm kind of asking a question that might kind of require you to read my mind. So I'll give a couple thoughts and then I'd love to hear your thoughts too.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Okay. So in my opinion, some good things to kind of think about as you're trying to navigate gentle nutrition. One is the functioning of your gut. So I know that many of my clients, this really resonates, and even for myself, like if you eat a meal that includes, a good balance of food groups, but also like, it's satisfying and it's filling and it isn't just one food, there's lots of different types of options there, there's some variety, and you're including some type of fibery food like a vegetable, let's just say, considering and noticing and being really curious about, okay, when I eat that way, how do I feel? How does my body, like, do I go to the bathroom the next day? Or do I notice that my things seem to function and move through me and I feel like I have good energy levels? I think that, like, if we can kind of outline a couple ways to sort of help people identify positive intentions rather than maybe some of the really ingrained sort of pathways people have for like broccoli equals dieting and I'm not pushing broccoli. It's okay if you don't like broccoli, you don't have to eat it. But does that make sense, Rachel, what I'm asking?
Yeah. Like what to think about in terms of making, sort of what to think about in terms of making choices or incorporating gentle nutrition.
How do they know if their intentions are in the right spot?
Right. So, I think, the biggie is kind of how food makes you feel. And certainly, digestion can be incorporated into that. Like, again, are you like feeling like you're going to the bathroom normally or, normally that's a very, that's a whole other topic that we can dive into. But, how you're feeling energy wise, like, is that a meal that keeps you feeling fueled and good until like the next time that you eat, whether that's another meal or snack. So I think, paying attention to how food makes you feel is a biggie. That said, like eating food that makes you feel kind of blah does not conflict with intuitive eating. And I don't know, like food also is not magical. We want to have realistic expectations. You're not going to like eat a meal that includes like, kale or whatever, or broccoli, and, all of a sudden feel like, wow, I'm totally energized. Like I'm on top of the world. Like you're not going to feel superhuman, feeling tired and feeling blah and feeling just like are parts of being a human being. So we definitely, want to keep those, keep those expectations in line. I think another thing is just like we can incorporate external knowledge about nutrition without it necessarily like we can use brain knowledge and our body knowledge. So, we can know that like human being bodies do well when they are provided with like a wide range of foods, when they're getting, fruits and vegetables, when they're getting, fiber rich sources of carbohydrates. Like we can take that sort of external knowledge, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, rooted in this sort of diet, weight control sort of thing. So I think it's okay to have some like external things that we might be, external knowledge that we're using along with our body knowledge of what feels good for us.
Yeah, that's so beautifully said.
Yeah.
That's such a tricky tricky part of this is shifting your mindset and approach toward food from dieting and weight loss being so intertwined with health that you can't even tell the difference. And I think really what you just said is highlighted so well this idea of actually weight loss and dieting, first of all, are not healthy. They do not promote our well-being. So we want to do our best to sort of separate those two concepts and say, okay, wait, my health and well-being, while it's not 100% in my control and all of those other nuances to that, but my health and well-being is separate from weight loss and dieting. They're not the same thing. I can make choices around food that, like you said, kind of come from these external knowledge of the science of nutrition and incorporating some of that while also weaving in what feels good to my body and what makes me feel my very best. And all of that can be very separate from dieting and weight loss. But a lot of times people kind of equate the two terms.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. And that's just because, that's all that you see about nutrition. It's always coming from this, air quote, control your weight, lens. And so it's really hard to think about what nutrition without this goal of weight loss looks like. But really it's kind of getting back to where we started the conversation, is that nutrition, feeding yourself well with food is really simple. Like, it's not anything complex or challenging.
Yes, agree. Do you have any favorite I'm putting you on the spot a lot today. Sorry, Rachel. But do you have any favorite mantras around gentle nutrition?
Oh, no, I'm awful with mantras.
Okay.
I wish I did.
I have one.
Yeah.
So one that I actually use for myself is I refuse to feel fear around food.
Yeah,
so
I like that.
I think that the reason that people, kind of circling back to the beginning of our conversation, I think the reason that folks in the intuitive eating space are kind of careful about this concept of gentle nutrition is, even if you are so careful in your language, it has potential to bring up fear for people, right? It has the potential to kind of trigger diet mentality and fear and all of that. And I think, like, from my perspective as someone who, I love nutrition. I think it's so much fun. I love food. It's very important to me. It's a big part of my life.
Right.
At the same time, I'm also sharing, like, there's like, I cannot think of a reason to feel fear around food. Like, it's just not scary.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if it's mold, if
Sure.
it's like moldy food.
Okay, thank you. There probably are some reasons.
Yes.
That would not be good.
Only exceptions I can think of to that.
Yeah, no, I'm sure there are exceptions. But in general, like, so this whole conversation we've had around food, I want the listeners to kind of think, like, if you felt any fear come up for you, if you felt if you've had that emotion or that feeling, I hope that you know that we do not, or at least I'm sure you feel the same, but we do not feel that food deserves your fear.
Yep, absolutely. It's just food at the end of the day. It's not a thing that we have to be precise about. There's no right or wrong decisions when it comes to food. There's no, I love that mantra.
And nutrition and feeding ourselves, in the end, is ultimately a lot of guesswork, right? Like, it's taking into account what you know about and what you've perceived is going on in your body. It's taking into account what's accessible to you in the moment, what might sound good or what's available. It's considering gently, balance or adequacy or those types of things. And then in the end, you are putting food into your body and you're moving on with your day. And it's a guessing game, right?
Yeah. It's every time we eat, we have a series, like, multiple choices that we can make, whether it's choosing, like, how much food we're eating, what foods we're eating, when we want to stop eating, like, all that, like, we have all these different options, and there's not a right or a wrong. Like, there might be certain options that have various pros or cons, along with it. But it's not there's no wrong choices.
Yeah. Rachel, that's something I say all the time. I talk about how part of why we struggle with food is the assumption that there is a right way to eat,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so if we can just remember, like, this is all just, we're doing the best we can. It's the bird's eye zoomed out view that really matters long term. And it's okay. It's normal and okay if sometimes you overshoot things or undershoot things. Eventually, things kind of even out and your body likes averages. And it's not something that you need to micromanage and feel a lot of fear or need to control.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. When you think about like each individual meal and snack in the context of your day, your week, your month, your year, your life, it's like, oh, is this really, like, I don't think anyone can ever look back and say, oh man, it was like the cookie I ate in 1992. Like that was the thing that did me in. So
it was that cookie.
Yeah. Yeah. It was that one cookie.
I bet it was good though, because I love cookies.
Yeah.
Okay. So Rachel, what other holes are there in the conversation or the exploration of gentle nutrition? What should we have said that we haven't said so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think we said a little bit of this, but I just want to emphasize that there's other ways to take care of your health outside of food. Like food is part of it, but whether that is nurturing friendships and your social connections, whether it's like nurturing a sort of spiritual connection, whether it's with like your religion or just like being out in nature, whether it's engaging in like a type of movement that's fun for you, or stimulating your brain with learning. Like there are so many ways that we can take care, like that like obviously there's part of health that's outside of our control, and there's this part that's our individual choices. But within those individual choices that we make, like nutrition is just one of those things. It is not the end all be all, and not even necessarily the most important. So again, if for whatever reason, nutrition needs to take a back burner, like go on the back burner for a bit, that's okay. Like you'll be okay.
I'll second that. So hopefully anyone who's like, yeah, that's just Rachel talking crazy because she's just or whatever. Two dietitians who care about nutrition and care about our, health and well-being and promoting that. That's our job. We both agree that, it's perfectly healthy and fine if that nutrition piece of your well-being takes a back seat for you to pursue other areas of your health and well-being, or because you need to heal from restriction or whatever it is.
Right. Absolutely.
Great point, Rachel. So Rachel, talk about how people can find you and follow along with your work and anything that's going on that's exciting for you right now with your work or anything you're up to.
Yeah. So probably the best place to find, well, the two best places to find me are on Instagram. That's kind of my favorite social media outlet. If you like Insta stories about big fluffy dogs, feel free to connect.
You have the cutest dogs.
They're the best. I'm such a stage mom with them. They're so cute. So Charlie
stage
and Savannah,
mom.
they will make your day with their antics. So I'm at Rachael, Rachael, and then Hartley, RD. And also on my website, which is RachelHartleyNutrition.com. You can find my blog there where I have a ton of resources on intuitive eating that I've been sharing over the years, including I think a few posts on gentle nutrition that might be helpful to reinforce some of what we talked about today. So yeah. And I know I wish I could say there's like fun upcoming new things with my business, but right now I'm speaking at Fancy this year. So if you're a dietitian, I hope you'll find me there. Yeah, doing a business related talk though. So that should be fun. But yeah, other than that, I'm just trying to, get through the week.
That's great. Yeah. And I will second what you said about your posts on gentle nutrition. The reason I invited you to talk about this with me is because I love you have such a clear voice on this topic. You are so good at exploring many sides to it and just simplifying it and making it seem less scary and more doable. And I just appreciate that about you. So I highly recommend people check out your work on gentle nutrition.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that.